Can you comment on the mid 19th century and how there's this sort of cultural swelling for objective truths? Just how radical some of the ideas are that's influencing
Hmm.
Nietzsche here to justify his questioning of God.
Well, yeah, the 1800s are an extraordinary era of intellectual ferment and cultural transformation. So, yeah, Industrial Revolution, the great battle against slavery, rising wealth, rising life expectancy, yeah, development of all of the modern sciences as we now understand them, and certainly biology is coming into its own in the middle part of the 19th century. So Nietzsche is born into extraordinary times, and at the same time, he's a precociously brilliant individual. So very well read for a teenager. Just plus the power of his mind means that he's going to penetrate to the deepest issues, and
Mhm.
as we know, extraordinarily courageous. Right? He's not one of these blinkered people who's just going to ignore certain things if they make him uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Also packed into your preamble there is a very interesting question that we come back to for all of us personally, but also for the great minds, is how much of their resulting intellectual product. So Nietzsche is a great philosopher. How much of that is autobiographical or to be explained by the events that he experienced, and then a generalization on his particular experience to more grand cosmological claims, and then how much of it comes from intellectual sources, his readings of the great minds, the great poets, his experience of reading Greek history, and as you know, he was a great classicist as well. So, but yes, to focus on just a couple of the themes that are going to be important for Nietzsche, one is going to be this idea of evolution. And I think Darwinian evolution is a little narrow for explaining Nietzsche's intellectual context. I mean, evolutionary ideas are everywhere in the 19th century. We now typically, because of the dominance of evolutionary biology, immediately think first to biological explanations for things, and Darwin and Mendel and genetics and all of that. But evolutionary ideas were not simply biological in the 19th century. There was a question then about whether cosmologically, the entire universe is going through an evolutionary stage.
Mm.
And so Hegelian ideas are being developed, and Marxist ideas, and both of those are kinds of evolutionary theories, but they're not at all informed by Darwinian biology. So it's a broader metaphysical concept. And what's important here is getting away from the idea cosmologically or even metaphysically that the universe is kind of fixed in terms of its broad sweeps, that there are laws of nature or laws of supernature that are fixed and eternal, and that those are unchanging across however long the universe has been around. The idea that the laws of the universe themselves change over the course of eons.
Mm.
So what's true perhaps in primitive times, and then in tribal times, and then in medieval times, and now into modern times, what's true metaphysically, even the laws of science, the laws of human nature, the laws of ethics, and so on, are themselves subject to evolution. Just as we think of it more narrowly biologically, biological species come and go, and what's true and good for any given biological species is not fixed for all time, but rather might adapt to circumstances. That if we generalize that, the same thing is going to be true. Now, it's also then going to be the case that if we think of not only the evolutionary theme, and certainly Nietzsche is an evolutionist in his small e evolutionist in his thinking.
Okay.
What does this then imply for not only the absolute truths of moral pronouncements, but where we get these moral pronouncements
Mm.
from? And again, with the rise of science over the course of the previous now really 3 centuries, there's much less belief among the intellectuals that there's a God who kind of delivered once and for all a certain set of fundamental truths about the world, about human obligations, about what the good life is. And in effect, we don't really have much intellectual work to do at that fundamental level. The package has already been delivered to us by an authoritative source, and we just accept and act on the basis of that. The rise of science means that by the time we get to the 1800s, most intellectuals are agnostic, at best, outright atheists. And even the people who are still theistic in their thinking have largely abandoned the idea that we can have any sort of rational basis for our.
Is that the case? I didn't realize it was that sort of persuasive, even in the early 1800s. I didn't think those ideas were
Yeah,
mainstream until the 1900s.
yeah, I would say, yeah, if you take by the time we get to the early 1800s, David Hume had died a generation earlier. Immanuel Kant died in 1804. Schopenhauer is a
Hmm.
dominant thinker of the teens and 20s and on into the 30s. And then
And
Soren
influence on Nietzsche.
Kierkegaard doing his major writings in the 1840s. Now, Kant is a kind of theist. Schopenhauer is an atheist. Kierkegaard is a kind of theist again as well. So the issue here is you have some people who are believing in the existence of God and some who are not believing in the existence of God. But what all of those guys believe is that you cannot prove the existence of a
Mm,
God. That if you're going to believe in the existence of God, it's going to be
mm.
non-rational.
It's going to
And
be
so a lot of
faith
that work
based.
had been done in the that's right. It's going to
Mm,
be faith-based, and it's going to be explicitly irrationalist, as in the
hmm.
case of in the case of Kierkegaard, for example. Or if it at all you have any sort of intellectual, rational integrity, you're just going to believe that all of the traditional stories about gods and so on are just myths,
Hmm.
and that they're there to just serve various psychological
Hmm.
functions. But an intellectually honest person has to be an atheist, and then you're going down the Schopenhauer road.
Yeah.
So it really had been the 1700s where all of the major arguments for and against the existence of God were subjected to rational scrutiny. And by the time we get to the death of Kant, early 1800s, most intellectuals, I think, don't think that any of the arguments for the existence of God work, that the arguments against are actually stronger. And you choose either you are going to be an atheist or you're going to be some sort of non rational
Hmm.
theist. And it's just going to be a Kierkegaardian or existentialist or proto-existentialist type
Mm.
of commitment. So this is the world that Nietzsche is born into, and it's then going to be, as you're suggesting, these evolutionary ideas are in the air, but cognitively, we're not able to rely on a God telling us what to do, or even the authoritative religious institutions to tell us what to do. To a large extent, we are on our
Hmm.
own cognitively. And so someone like Nietzsche who says, okay, I'm not afraid of that, he's going to take that up
Yep.
as a
Yep.
challenge. But at the same time, that the traditional beliefs and comfortable beliefs that there's a benevolent God looking out for us, that has all been exploded. But also there's been significant attack on our cognitive faculties. This is also outside of the hard sciences an extraordinarily skeptical time
Hmm.
philosophically. So Kantianism has, might be something we need to talk about more as background. Kantianism has kind of swept the German intellectual world, and Nietzsche himself is very well read in Kant, and says several times that he thinks Kant is essentially right. But what Kant's being essentially right means that to the extent that we believe in Kantianism, we have to be skeptics, we have to be relativistic, we have to understand that our rational faculty is just this superficial, imposing structure on a kind of a seething, unknowable world, right, and so forth. If you then combine that with the evolutionism, then what you get is this idea that we were animals for a lot longer than we were rational animals. That our entire higher cognitive set of faculties is, it's come along just in the last blink of an eye in evolutionary time, and it's overlaying all of these animalistic drives and instincts and so forth. And so, really, reason is just this after the fact rationalizing function. It's not really something that can probe deeply into the nature
Mm.
of the world. So, something like that would be a very quick thumbnail sketch of the world that Nietzsche
Yeah.
is born
Very,
into.
very